Welcome to the Why Not You podcast, where our goal is to inspire, teach, and elevate your personal journey. Our heart-centered guests love sharing some of their life-changing aha moments, hoping that it might be of benefit to you. Welcome to the Why Not You podcast, and Happy New Year to everyone. Today we have on the line with us Eric Zuzack, and Eric's path is a very interesting one, and it's taken him from being an event promoter, promoting some of the biggest names in personal growth and development, a stockbroker, truck driver, an Amazon best-selling author, and now Eric is the host of a 5-star rated podcast, Porn Talk, and is a porn and sex addiction recovery coach. Eric, welcome, and wow, what a journey. If that doesn't reach out and grab someone's attention, I'm not sure anything will.
Thanks, Glade. It's great to be on the podcast with you, with a fellow book author.
You know, Eric, before we get going, I really like to take a few minutes and let the listeners get a little bit of a snapshot picture of what it was like for you growing up as a kid. What was it like at your household?
Well, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and Missouri on the license plate at the bottom of all the plates, it says the show me state. So we want to taste it, we want to see it, we want to touch it, we want to grab it. So I'm certainly very much like that. And I grew up in a traditional, very Catholic household and went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school. And I had a great childhood. But my father, this would be a part of the addiction part. My dad was a great guy. We all have toolboxes of things that we use in life, and his toolbox was pretty small on the father part of it because his mom and dad had some big challenges, and he always escaped in books, and he became a professor in chemistry. So when he got married and had kids, he still escaped into books. And so my father loved me dearly, but he did the best he could with the tools that he had. So I've heard that with addictions, that a lot of people that were like abused in that, and then there's other people on the other spectrum that were ignored or things like that. And the ones that were kind of ignored, it's almost even worse. And that was me. I was kind of ignored, but not on purpose. My dad just was using the tools that he had available to him.
No, I get that. And you know, Eric, nowadays we live in this Instagram perfect world where everything's hunky-dory and you got it all going on. And that's the picture that's being portrayed. But that's not reality, is it? I mean, life doesn't always work out exactly how you think it's going to be. And what we like to do on this show is we like to talk about the realities, the hard truths that are out there.
Absolutely.
So you grew up, and did you go to college, or what happened then?
I worked my way through high school and college. I got a job at a computer software company called Tripos, and I really enjoyed that. And then I went to college while I was working at that job, Webster University in St. Louis. But always, through it all, I was always reading personal development books, Think and Grow Rich, things like that.
How did you get turned on to that? I mean, and that's ultimately probably how it led to working with Kyle Wilson and Brian Tracy and promoting
It's funny. The funny story, infomercials. Back in the 80s,
yes,
infomercials were really big, late night infomercials. And Tony Robbins, of course, his personal power. And I would actually set our VHS recorder to record infomercials. Personal development infomercials.
What do you think led you to that? You know, was it maybe that father figure or that guidance, that tutelage that you were looking for? I mean, is that what was resonating with you?
Well, the thing that fascinated me was how the mind works. And a lot of these different personal development programs, they talk about the subconscious mind and the power of your mind. And my dad actually had some interest in that. And he noticed that I had some interest in it. And he would actually give me articles.
Interesting. All right. And so how did that lead then to the event promotion business?
Yeah. So I was working for the computer software company, and I liked it, but I didn't like it. I had a love-hate relationship with the technology, with computers. And so while I was working there, I heard about Toastmasters, and Toastmasters is an international organization and it helps people to speak on their feet. It's not about making toast, although I did use it for that once for a wedding, but it is about improving your public speaking skills. And I just loved it, but I had no idea, like, what am I going to talk about? I was a really young guy and going to Toastmasters. And so I was in Toastmasters for years, and our particular Toastmasters group, South County Toastmasters, went on to be the number 2 Toastmasters group in the entire world this one year. Like, they have this like competition, and our chapter was the second chapter in the world. And that was a crucial step in my life, because little did I know, I went to a Toastmasters meeting that I was speaking at, and a gentleman named Rick Pearson came to our meeting, and they were doing an event in St. Louis for Jim Rohn. And he came to our meeting. I was speaking there and ended up going to the Jim Rohn event. It was a 3-day event, went to that. It was awesome. And also the author of Chicken Soup for the Soul, or the co-author, Mark Victor Hansen, was there. He spoke. He called on me. I was in the front row. He called on me to stand up and tell everybody to stretch. I will never forget that. Stretch. And he threw me a free book for doing that. And so my friend knew Rick somehow, and I ended up sending him a VHS demo tape of me speaking. And then before I know it, I got been so long. I don't know, something called me and said, we're interested. And however, I would have to live on the road completely, like pretty much give up, my apartment. We'd go from city to city, and it was 100% straight commission. So if you didn't sell, you didn't eat. And I had public speaking skills and computer skills. I didn't have sales skills. So it was, but I knew Brian Tracy and I knew all his, his stuff. So I was able to,
go out and promote that
and learn
and get butts in the chairs, as they say in the industry.
But this is the craziest thing. I was using Brian Tracy's goal planner. I got ahead of myself. I was using Brian Tracy's goal planner that I wanted to work in the personal development industry. I'm using his goal planner, and I got hired by Jim Rohn International with Kyle Wilson.
Yes.
So Rick calls me and he's like, we just hired you. I'm kind of bummed out to tell you this, but Jim Rohn, he's doing another project, so we're not going to be promoting Jim Rohn right now. I was like, oh man, that's a bummer. He's like, yeah, we're going to be promoting this guy named Brian Tracy. And I about fell off my chair. Like, I was literally using Brian Tracy's goal planner to get a job in the personal development industry. And here we're going to be promoting Brian Tracy. It was a dream come true. I got to go pick him up at the airport. I was in a limo with him. I mean, it was awesome.
Amazing experience.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And so you did that for quite a while. And then it was actually at one of those events that something came to you, something happened. There was something that really was a aha moment. Do you want to share that with our listeners?
Yeah. So I am giving a presentation, Brian Tracy's upcoming event. And what we do is we would go out on the road. We would set up appointments with like car dealerships and any type of place that has large sales forces. And then say, we're going to give a free presentation. All we ask is at the end of the talk, if we could let everybody know about the Brian Tracy event. So we'd go in and talk about things like having a passion, persistence, self-responsibility, and attitude. And so I'm giving this presentation talking about self-responsibility. And while I'm saying those words, I have a flash into my mind of me acting out to pornography the night before. And I got tongue-tied. And it really wasn't that big. I recovered, and the audience didn't know what that was about, but I knew what it was about. I was not congruent in my life. I was saying all these wonderful things about self-responsibility, yet here I was acting out the porn. And, some people drink, some people use drugs, and I was using porn. And even though this was a dream position for me, There's a thing called positive stress. Like just because an event is good and great doesn't mean that it's not stressful. And so I was living on the road. I'd never been out of St. Louis much at all. And here I was in Costa Mesa, California. It was where our apartment was for that first event. We lived there for 6 months, and it was awesome and it was stressful. And I had already opened that door, with the pornography, but it really knocked me off my feet.
Yeah, nowadays people call it imposter syndrome and this and that and the other. But the bottom line is you just weren't congruent with yourself and you were a fraud. I mean, not to anyone else, but to yourself. And so what did that lead to? Where did it go from there when you had this aha moment that, this is not who I am?
Yeah, I knew I had a problem, but I wasn't quite sure how to address it. It's a really embarrassing thing, even more taboo than like drugs and alcohol.
Sure.
And so we were on a road team and Kyle was changing gears on what he was doing. So the road team was ending. And what we were doing temporarily was to go back to where we live and just selling the product, books, tapes, and that wasn't exactly working out. So because I had a background now in sales, I became a stockbroker for Morgan Stanley, and I trained in the Twin Towers about a year before they were hit. This is also surreal to talk about it. I get goosebumps. So we're training in the Twin Towers. I'm saying to one of my colleagues, I'm like, man, that must have been really frightening years ago when there was that terrorist attack here. That must have been awful. And not knowing what was going to happen. Now, I, for various reasons, left Morgan Stanley. In fact, I left being a stockbroker pretty quickly. But I remember being in St. Louis and I was at the truck driving job. I went all over the place. My brother got me a job making deliveries for a telecommunications company. And while I was doing that, I had a box cutter in my hand, which was so weird. I was cutting up boxes, putting them in a dumpster. And my brother comes running out. He's like, the Twin Towers got hit. The first one got hit. And then I saw with my own eyes the second one get hit. And immediately, of course, knew it was a terrorist attack. And my boss was actually in the towers, but was able to escape. Other people from Morgan Stanley I knew were in the towers, were able to escape. Everybody I know was able to escape. So the telecommunications company goes into like this lockdown, like you can't go into the buildings. So they sent everybody home. There was nothing we could do. And now when I was at home, John Perchborn, a local TV personality, says my boss's name and that somehow they got this information that he was able to escape. And another thing, there was another one. It's like I was almost fell off my chair. I was like, my God, my boss was, now that was my ex-boss at the time. I was like, wow, he was there. And it scared me. I mean, it really frightened me. And I sunk deeper into my addiction.
Through all that period of time. And then, gosh, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, I remember I'm in Hong Kong and I'm on a treadmill and it's late in the afternoon and I'm watching this whole thing, transpire. And I'm like calling people back in the United States saying, are you seeing this? Are you seeing this? I'm literally waking them up. Anyway, so I get it when you're like blown away and it's just like, what in the world is going on? I didn't know if I was going to get home. I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
I mean, because everything was shut down.
Yeah. So that made things worse. And I knew I had a problem. So I started to seek professional help. And one of the first things I was told that I must do is go to 12-step meetings. And the 12-step meetings, for those that aren't familiar, it's like Alcoholics Anonymous. And you go through the 12 steps. And that may be great and fine for alcohol. But I can tell you from all the guys that I see went through those programs, I was in those programs for almost 20 years. And guys come in, they leave. They come in, they leave. They come in and leave. I can't tell me how you guys I saw circle through, but I was committed. I wanted to overcome this. And one of the things they have you say is that you are powerless over the addiction.
In the 12-step system, they're telling you, actually feeding you a negative, like you are powerless.
Yeah. Well, you introduce yourself by saying, hi, my name is Eric. I'm a sexaholic and I'm powerless over porn. And then you go on to describe some of the worst behaviors you've had. And that was totally, completely opposite of what I'm learning in personal development. And it was so hard for me. It really messed me up. But I was committed, and quote unquote professionals said I needed to go to these meetings. And so I went to Sexual Compulsive Anonymous, SLA, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, even though I'm not an alcoholic. I went to all these different S meetings, all these different 12-step meetings. I became a professional 12-stepper. And all along, I'm saying I'm powerless. I'm powerless over this. And the idea, just for people that aren't familiar, is you say you're powerless over it and you turn it over to God. Now, I'm a very spiritual person. Okay. So
Right.
I very much grabbed onto that concept. But there's also a thing that says God helps those who help themselves, So it may work for some people, but the whole powerlessness thing wasn't working for me. So finally, after going to these meetings for years and still not being very successful and quitting, I just said, there's got to be another way. And so I had looked at all different things online. I found this little app that used the science of mindfulness to break addictions. And that app no longer exists, unfortunately. But I, just on a whim, I was creating my login and password. And I decided, I'm going to put in Powerful Eric as my login. And in that moment, pitiful, powerless, porn-addicted Eric died and Powerful Eric was born. I don't call myself Powerful Eric out of ego. It's out of having called myself a piece of shit and powerless for all those years.
Decades, actually.
Decades, yeah.
Wow, that's powerful.
And that is when things started to turn around.
Wow. We talk a lot about mindset, vision, and habits here on this podcast. And so the vision of yourself had to change.
Yes.
You had to see yourself as powerful Eric versus powerless Eric.
Yeah.
And then
identity change.
That was the paradigm shift. And from there, things really started to change. Were you perfect after that point?
Absolutely not. Far from it. But I started looking myself in the mirror instead of brushing my teeth for a powerless porn addict. I could look in the mirror and start to say, I'm Eric. Not only am I Eric, I'm powerful Eric. I don't have to identify with the problem. I was moving through this challenge in my life rather than I am this. I really believe in the very beginning of overcoming really any addiction, there's definitely some value there of saying, hey, I've got a problem, but what happens is people start to identify with it. And it's terrible. I mean, you go to these meetings are like in the basement of a church or something like that. And it's like, that's the basement. That's where we keep the sex and porn. So no, I was no longer looking at myself that, and I stopped going to those meetings, and I found a sex and a porn addiction recovery coach, and that's what I am now. And that's when I really started making some serious progress. And like I said, the thing that was so challenging is it was the opposite of what I was learning all these years in personal development. But I'm like, well, this is what these people say I should do to overcome this. And I did it for many years, and it just doesn't work. It may work better on alcohol and drugs, but I tell you, sex addiction is a different animal. You can leave drugs and alcohol out of the house, but, I carry my genitals wherever I go.
Right. Eric, you said you found a coach, and I believe wholeheartedly that we all need a coach. We all need a coach for different things in our lives. I mean, Tiger Woods has a swing coach, and he has a nutrition coach and all those kinds of things. And so you found that coach, and that helped you tremendously. And now you're a coach. How did that all happen? And tell us a little bit about what your goals are as a porn addiction coach.
Right. Well, I had struggled with this for most of my life. And I have seen, through all the years going to those 12-step meetings, how debilitating this can be and really like scar people for life and like ruin their lives over this. Like people don't realize what a epidemic is. This is one of the epidemic that's going on. People don't realize that I'm a porn addiction recovery coach and I have children reaching out to me for help. Now, to be clear, I do not coach children, but I do have a resource I send them to, a good resource actually, if they come to me. But I wanted to help people overcome this because I didn't want people to go through what I had to go through. I went the traditional route. I went to a traditional therapist. I went to a traditional psychiatrist, went to the 12-step programs. That's the traditional model that does not work on sex and porn addiction. But the coaching was working. Was I perfect? No, but it was dramatically better. And I just felt better about myself. Let's just say this wasn't the case, but let's just say I still acted out just as much as I did before. Let's just say that. I still was feeling better about myself because I wasn't looking in the mirror and telling myself every day that I'm powerless and that I'm a sex and porn addict. Like that's not empowering, And yes, you need to know the truth and state the truth. So anyway, I wanted to help others with this. And so the coaching did great for me. So I decided to become a sex addiction and recovery coach. I went through the whole process to learn on how to do that. And now there are coaches out there doing that. And so I was in sales most of my life. Even when I was at the computer software company, I was in sales administration. So the niche that I like to help is salesmen and entrepreneurs, because that's what I know. I mean, and I know how stressful, like when you're in 100% commission job, like if you don't sell, you don't eat. And that was my first experience with Kyle and Brian Tracy.
Right.
And in the beginning, it wasn't going so well. But eventually I remember distinctly when I was in Indianapolis, I was the number one sales for Brian Tracy's event. And Brian and Kyle came back and shook my hand and it felt so good. I still remember it. But I didn't want to just talk to any, Tom, Dick, or Harry out there. I have direct experience with being an entrepreneur and in being in sales. And I want to help men who are in sales or in entrepreneurs that are struggling with sex or porn addiction. And because, I can tell you, like, I can't name names, of course, but I'll just say this is a very high, powerful lawyer. The very powerful lawyer contacted me, very rich. And he was beside himself. Like, I obviously can't play the message that he left for me, but it was really kind of heartbreaking. And he was afraid that he's going to lose his wife and kids, that maybe he would even lose his company.
Yeah.
And now this is very unusual. I've only done this once, but it is something I'm putting out there to offer. I actually flew out there and I actually stayed with him and his family for 5 days. And it was an amazing experience. He's completely stopped all acting out. His lawyer practice has taken off even more so. He says everything is much better there. And so it's really extremely rewarding. I've saved many marriages on that one in particular, for sure.
Well, that's very honorable and that's awesome. And I know you have a big, hairy, audacious goal in your practice and in your, in helping and serving others. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I want to help 1 million men, 1 million sex and porn addicts around the world. And, prior to the internet, that would be almost impossible. Nothing's impossible, but with the internet, that's very achievable. It's very achievable. And, it may not be directly like, I don't plan on working directly with 1 million people. That would be insanity. But between my podcast and, like what we're doing right now, people listening to this podcast,
your books,
like it's possible. It's totally possible.
Absolutely. Well, I'll put in the show notes how people can get in touch with you and connect on your podcast and whatnot, Eric. And I just think it's amazing the vulnerability that you're displaying. And it's got to be challenging to talk about a porn addiction. I mean, a little bit humiliating.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know what the right word is.
I remember the day that I decided that I didn't want to do this. I was sitting in my friend William's office. He's often on my podcast. I call him Sir William. And Sir William and I were talking, and I'm like, this is what I want to do. But man, I have to like tell the world that I was addicted to porn. Like, I don't want to do that. I really did not want to do it. He's like, yeah, it sounds like that's what you need to do or what you want to do. And it was scary. It was scary. And I actually went through all the, stuff to get my certification without my family or friends. No one knew. And finally, then I had made my podcast, Porn Talk. I'm like, well, it's coming out now. Then I was on the radio, a local radio station in St. Louis. I'm like, well, if they didn't hear the podcast, it's now on the radio in St. Louis. So now I'm obviously not embarrassed about that anymore. And the reason I'm not embarrassed about it, because you wouldn't believe like how many people this affects. I have men literally reach out to me from around the globe. I'm talking from third world countries.
Yeah.
I'm talking like a 12-year-old girl. I mean, there's no race, no creed, any demographic this goes by. This is a true epidemic. This is ruining so many marriages. I can't even begin to tell you. Divorce lawyers say that over 50% of marriages end cite porn as at least a contributing factor to the divorce. So it's really bad.
So how do you channel the sex drive? And how are you teaching, sounds like mostly man, how are you teaching these entrepreneurs, salespeople to channel that drive, that addiction, to be productive? How do you do that?
And it is a power. If you read, one of the things I have them do right off the bat is get the book, Think and Grow Rich, go to chapter 11, and in there is the mystery of sex transmutation. The mystery of sex transmutation. It is a powerful chapter written in the 30s. Man, he was so ahead of his time.
Yes. You will.
Read that chapter, channel that energy. And the thing that I had to learn the hard way is about identity change, that you don't identify with the addiction. I like to say I was going through a challenging time in my life. I was moving through this addiction now rather than saying, what I used to say. And it's about identity change, changing the way we see ourselves. Like you are moving through this challenge, and I've got a lot of tools and techniques that I use, but I see over your shoulder a pair of boxing gloves. And
Muhammad Ali.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love martial arts. Martial arts is a great way to channel your sexual energy. And as a salesperson, if you're going into a sale, if you don't have that sparkle in your eye and that skip in your step, it may be challenging with that sale. And boy, how dark my eyes must have been seeing prospects. When I'd act that out the night before, there certainly wasn't the sparkle in my eye and the skip in my step. That sexual energy is powerful. And we can channel that into, take that sexual energy. And I literally have guys can't really demonstrate it on the podcast here, but breathe up that sexual energy from the lower head to the upper head, to
Right.
literally breathe that energy up and start thinking sex isn't just about procreation. That sexual energy is used for you to birth ideas into this world, to birth whatever project into the world. So to take
Dreams, hopes, aspirations, all those types of things.
yes, to take that sexual energy, that's been a huge part of my work is for guys that may be in sales, but they're not exactly in the niche they want to, or they're not exactly pursuing their dream. Like, what is your dream? And that's a huge part of it. Because if you're not going for your dreams, Les Brown says you're literally committing spiritual suicide. And I had abandoned, when I had taken the job driving the delivery truck, I had completely abandoned my hopes and dreams. Like, who's going to want to hear what a broke porn addict has to say? And so I'd given up on my dreams. And in fact, in the book Think Big, in my story in there, I tell the story about how pains me to say this, I took the majority of my personal development library and I literally threw it in a church's dumpster. And I had a lot. I didn't throw it all away. I kept some gems, but most of it, I said, this crap doesn't work. But it does work. It does work. I was just in a dark place.
Right. Well, Eric, this has been transformational, I hope, for someone. And I always like to ask in the end, as we kind of summarize here, if there's one thing that you could share, one aha moment or tidbit of counsel, advice, however you want to say it. If there was one piece of advice that you could give to the listeners today, what would that be?
A couple things. Your sex energy is powerful. It is very powerful. And if you can channel that into your hopes and dreams, you can do what you set your mind to. And another thing I want to leave the listeners with, if they are struggling with sex and porn addiction, believe me, you are not alone. It's you and at least several million other people that are struggling with this. So, but it is possible to overcome it. It is possible. You can do it.
But it's work.
Yes, it's a lot of work. Oh, and I want to mention real quick, I do come bearing gifts. If your listener is struggling with sex or porn addiction, they can send me an email, eric@powerfuleric.com, and I'll send them a free copy of Everything You Know About Sex and Porn Addiction is Wrong, the 21 Myths About Sex and Porn Addiction. eric@powerfuleric.com, and I'll send it to them.
Excellent. And I'll put it in the show notes, how to get a hold of you and, your website and your podcast and that type of thing, so that hopefully someone will, if they're struggling with this, they'll reach out and get some help.
Great.
Eric, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Clay. My pleasure.
We'd like to thank our guests for sharing a part of their experience with us on this episode of Why Not You? Also, we'd like to thank Mix It 6 Studios for producing, editing, mixing, and creating our great music for this podcast. But most importantly, we'd like to thank you for listening. Be sure to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode of Why Not You? See you next time.